Across the shattered ruins of Europe, church bells rang, rifles cracked into the air, and banners declared a long-awaited liberation. For countless millions, it marked the end of 6 years of total war and unbearable loss. Yet for a quiet group of young German women standing in the shadows of abandoned railway yards, the meaning was far different. Their uniforms were faded remnants of Wehrmacht auxiliaries, their boots split, their hair matted after weeks of desperate retreat. Many were barely 20, their faces still carrying traces of youth beneath soot and exhaustion. They had served as clerks, radio operators, typists, and nurses, fragile cogs in a machine that consumed their nation before collapsing in defeat. Now, with the Reich in ashes, they were not heading home, but toward an unknown captivity. It was a haunting sight, lines of women in grey-green skirts dragging dented suitcases, stepping into dark wooden boxcars once filled with soldiers. Some clutched rosaries, others ration tins, and some carried nothing at all. A girl from Hamburg whispered, "The Americans will not spare us. They will make examples of us," repeating the warning of a Luftwaffe officer during surrender. Another, hardened from years beneath searchlights, remained silent, her jaw set with grim defiance. They had been told endlessly that the Americans were wolves, that capture meant humiliation, cruelty, or worse. The trains rolled westward through a continent of ashes. Burned villages drifted past like ghosts. Bridges collapsed into rivers. Churches stood roofless beneath empty skies. Children waved from embankments, their faces pale as paper, silent symbols of hunger and loss. At night, the train halted amid darkness, and the women huddled close for warmth, listening to the guards' footsteps and distant gunfire echoing over the ruins. One among them, Anna, a secretary from Munich, wrote in a small diary she kept hidden, "We are being taken far, none knows where. My mother will think I am dead. Perhaps I will be." Their journey ended not in a German camp, but in the chaos of occupied ports, Bremen, Le Havre, Cherbourg, where American ships waited. They were marched aboard under watchful eyes, expecting insults and blows, but finding only order, registration, and silence. The ship engines thundered, and as Europe's coast receded, dread deepened. Across the Atlantic, America awaited, distant, mysterious, painted as a land of enemies and myths. Below deck, seasickness spread quickly. The air was thick with diesel and salt, bunks stacked like cages. Yet the food astonished them: white bread, hot coffee, real meat. Suspicion flickered, then disbelief, then tears, for even kindness felt alien after years of hunger. "They feed us as they feed themselves," one whispered, unable to understand. When the ships neared New York and Boston, the women gathered at the rail, watching untouched skylines rise against the dawn. The Statue of Liberty appeared through the mist, her torch burning like a silent question none dared answer. The women were marched ashore under guard, their boots echoing against the wooden planks beneath the sharp morning light. The air smelled different, cleaner, freer, salted by the ocean breeze yet untouched by the choking ash of war. For the first time, many understood how utterly their world had collapsed and how final Germany's defeat truly was. Their homeland lay buried beneath rubble, but America stood untouched, prosperous, and alive in a way they could scarcely comprehend. Buses and trains carried them inland toward camps across the United States, from Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia to Camp Rustin in Louisiana, and countless others scattered beyond. The roads stretched endlessly before them, lined with green fields and tidy towns where children pedaled bicycles past white-porched houses that gleamed in the sunlight. For women who had seen their cities consumed by flames under Allied bombers, this vision felt almost impossible. They whispered quietly, their voices trembling between disbelief and fear. Could this really be the land of monsters, the world their leaders had cursed with such venom? The Reich had promised triumph and delivered only ruins, while the enemy seemed to dwell in another kind of civilization altogether. At the camp gates, their names were recorded, their few belongings catalogued, and their tattered uniforms replaced with plain work clothes. Yet before they could rest, one final process awaited them. The guards, firm but not cruel, guided them toward a low concrete building where steam drifted from open vents. Inside, pipes hissed and water dripped in rhythmic echoes that tightened every throat in the line. None yet understood it was the delousing station. Whispers circled with dread, each woman imagining humiliation or retribution, the punishment they had been warned to expect. One clutched her small suitcase like a shield, another crossed herself silently. But when the doors opened, fear dissolved into bewilderment. They were given bars of soap, real soap, thick and fragrant, followed by towels and clean garments. Warm water cascaded from the showers, washing away months of dirt, sweat, and despair. Some wept uncontrollably, others laughed softly, almost childlike, unable to grasp such unexpected mercy. That night, Anna wrote in her diary, her trembling hand tracing uncertain words upon the page. We were told we would be beaten, mocked, broken. Instead, we were given soap. How could this be? She did not know this moment would outlast the war in her memory, more vivid than defeat itself. In their bunks, wrapped in starched blankets and damp hair, they lay listening to the hum of crickets outside the wire. The American night was peaceful, distant from gunfire, filled with strange gentleness. They whispered quietly, wondering whether their enemies were truly what they had been told. Perhaps something greater awaited, something neither fear nor propaganda could name. The soap, slippery and fragrant in their hands, became their first fragile symbol of grace. This was not the grim brutality of a concentration camp. This was something bewilderingly different and quietly disorienting. The wooden barracks were neatly painted, the paths swept clean, and though fences enclosed the perimeter, they no longer radiated menace. The women glanced at one another, their expressions mirroring the same unspoken question. What strange world had they entered now? When the buses halted, each woman received a numbered tag, and American officers moved with brisk precision, recording names and stamping documents. Expecting harshness, the prisoners stiffened instinctively, ready for insults or barked commands, but none came. The guards spoke evenly, their English softened by southern drawls or the measured tones of the Midwest, and their calmness was almost incomprehensible. For many, the greatest shock was not cruelty, but indifference, a quiet bureaucracy replacing rage. To the Americans, these women were neither monsters nor guests, merely prisoners to be processed, catalogued, and housed. The delousing station had unsettled them with its unexpected decency, yet the strangeness deepened further afterward. After showers, they entered a mess hall heavy with aromas of coffee and frying grease. Steam fogged the windows, and long tables gleamed beneath trays piled high with food, boiled potatoes, carrots, beef stew, and golden rolls brushed with butter. The women froze at the doorway, overwhelmed by the richness, unable to reconcile such abundance with their memories of scarcity. Reluctantly, they approached as a guard gestured forward, and cooks in white aprons ladled stew, passed bread, and poured steaming coffee into tin mugs. The prisoners accepted the trays with trembling hands, as though carrying explosives, their eyes wide with disbelief. In Germany, during the war's final winter, meals had been black bread with sawdust, thin turnip soup, and rare scraps of meat. Now, inside the enemy's camp, they were fed more in one meal than in a week at home. Anna sat silently at a long table, her diary hidden beneath her mattress, and watched the greasy broth glisten before tasting it cautiously. Her eyes widened as flavor touched her tongue, and she pressed her hand to her mouth in shameful astonishment. Around her, others began eating in quiet surrender, the hall echoing with only the soft scrape of metal on tin. One whispered brokenly that her brothers had starved while the Americans fed them like this. The humiliation they had expected never came, replaced instead by unsettling civility. Guards walked their rounds with detached professionalism, one even smiling faintly in reassurance, and that human kindness disturbed them most. Days later, the pattern repeated itself with unnerving normality. Morning bells, orderly breakfasts, assigned chores, and light duties. Some women washed uniforms in the laundries, others worked kitchens or nearby fields, earning wages in camp currency redeemable at the canteen. On wooden shelves lay chocolates, cigarettes, pencils, and lipstick, small luxuries that seemed miraculous. They stood before those goods in silent disbelief, realizing that the enemy's victory was measured not in cruelty, but in ordinary mercy. The irony was almost unbearable, for back in Germany their families scavenged for scraps while cities lay buried in ashes. Children searched through shattered streets for crumbs, and letters arrived rarely, often soaked with despair. One woman read by candlelight, "We live in the cellar now, the house above destroyed. We boil weeds for soup." She folded the page with trembling fingers, knowing she could send no food, only words across an ocean of ruin. The distance between their broken homeland and the camp's strange abundance widened with every day that passed. Shame grew heavier than chains, pressing silently upon them as they ate warm stew beneath an enemy's flag. The Reich had demanded loyalty, sent them to man radios and searchlights, and gave only hunger and rubble in return. America, once sworn as the enemy, offered soap, blankets, and bread. That inversion gnawed quietly at their souls, a truth they could not voice aloud. At night they lay awake, listening to crickets beyond the wire, questioning what justice or mercy meant anymore. Some refused to yield, hiding crusts beneath pillows, convinced the generosity masked deceit. Rumors whispered through bunks, claiming the food was drugged or the soap poisoned, yet nothing ever happened except the quiet rhythm of survival. Slowly, suspicion faded, bodies filled out, skin cleared, and fear softened into reluctant peace. The guards, too, observed with uneasy curiosity, many having never seen German women except through the lens of propaganda. They were surprised to find not monsters, but frail, weary faces, eyes hollow, yet searching for safety. One guard wrote home, "They are not what we were told. They look at us waiting for a blow that never comes." Thus the war transformed into something unseen, fought not with rifles, but with perception and conscience. Each loaf of bread, each bar of soap, each quiet kindness struck deeper than gunfire, dismantling the images both sides had been taught. The women faced a battle between memory and truth, where mercy cut sharper than hate. Anna captured it in her diary. "To be treated with dignity by those we called beasts, it is harder than hatred." Her words carried the ache of revelation, for cruelty had once defined their world, but kindness now threatened to unmake them. As the sun sank beyond the fields, painting gold across a peaceful sky, they felt a new unease take root, realizing survival was no longer the challenge, but understanding humanity itself. Morning bell, breakfast line, work detail, supper, lights out. Yet beneath that mechanical rhythm, a slow, unsettling transformation began unfolding. At first, the women tallied days like inmates etching hopeless lines on stone, but soon their fury softened into confusion and disbelief. Captives they remained, yet they were nourished, clothed, even paid, a paradox unthinkable for women shaped by a crumbling Reich where loyalty brought only starvation. This moral inversion gnawed at them more sharply than the barbed fences surrounding their confinement. Anna, once a clerk in a Munich office typing orders she never questioned, now spent her days in the laundry room. The smell of starch and soap lingered on her hands as she scrubbed American uniforms spotless. Each garment bore the name of a man once called her enemy, yet as she folded the fabric with careful precision, hatred ebbed into an inexplicable calm. Here was labor that sustained rather than destroyed, and she clung to its strange mercy. Sometimes she saw her reflection in the gleaming metal of the washing drums and failed to recognize the woman staring back. Others were dispatched into the fields, harvesting crops under watchful eyes that seemed less hostile with every passing day. Sunlight warmed their backs, earth gathered beneath their nails, and baskets grew heavy with yield that nourished both guard and captive alike. Some even laughed softly, startled by the honest ache of muscles long unused, recalling the distant villages they had fled. When evening shadows stretched across the camp, they returned weary but strangely lighter in spirit. This was not the degradation they had feared. It was something wholly unexpected. The canteen emerged as the most bewildering corner of their new existence, lined with shelves of foreign plenty. With small paper wages called camp script, they could purchase chocolate, cigarettes, or gleaming jars of jam. The first time Anna bit into a Hershey bar, sweetness overwhelmed her senses like a forgotten dream, and tears welled before she turned away. A young woman from Bremen applied lipstick before a cracked mirror, whispering, "I feel human again," as though admitting guilt. Yet abundance became a burden when letters arrived from home, written in hunger and ruin. Families spoke of collapsed apartments, children coughing in cellars, and bread lines frozen in despair. One letter begged, "If only we had your American bread." Silence followed, broken by the scratching of rats beneath floorboards. Trays of food cooled untouched as shame and privilege clashed within trembling hands. Guards, too, noticed the contradiction, remarking how their captives regained color and strength. Under the Geneva Convention, such treatment was law, though its irony bit deep across both sides. Suspicion lingered still, whispered in the dark by those who feared deception's veil might yet fall. Some hoarded crumbs, waiting for cruelty to return, but time dulled resistance until acceptance settled like dust. No beatings came, no vengeance followed, only relentless civility. Anna's diary spoke of this haunting mercy, each kindness cutting deeper than cruelty ever could. To be treated with dignity by the enemy felt unbearable, a contradiction that unsettled every instinct shaped by years of propaganda. Amid this emotional disarray, small encounters with Americans deepened the confusion that pressed against their sense of self and loyalty. One evening, during roll call, a young guard dropped his flashlight, and Anna instinctively stooped, returning it before hesitation could stop her. Their fingers brushed lightly, their eyes met for a fleeting instant, and though he offered only a quiet nod, the gesture lingered in her mind for days. Another afternoon, a soldier passing by the laundry hummed a soft, rhythmic tune that carried the easy warmth of distant cities. A girl from Cologne recognized the melody, laughed, and joined in shyly, two voices uniting for a moment across the impossible gulf that war had created. Yet not all guards were kind. Some stared with bitterness, sharpened by grief for brothers buried in Europe, though even their anger rarely crossed into cruelty. The women lived suspended between punishment and reprieve, uneasy in a limbo that denied both hatred and peace. They were not free, yet they were not brutalized, existing instead within the quiet tension of an uncertain mercy. Then came the day they were taken beyond the wire to work in nearby towns, riding in trucks through streets unscarred by war. Their eyes widened at windows stacked with goods, at bakeries spilling sweetness into the air, at children chasing hoops down clean sidewalks. Men sat on porches reading newspapers beneath awnings untouched by bombs. Cars gleamed in rows beneath the sun. Movie posters glowed on red brick walls. To women whose last memories of Germany were rubble and ashes, the sight was staggering, almost unreal in its normalcy. America was not only intact, it was flourishing, its abundance shining like a mirror reflecting their homeland's ruin. That night, the barracks buzzed with whispers about bread, cars, and white flour, wonders that felt almost indecent to behold. For some, the sight was intoxicating. For others, unbearable proof of their nation's collapse. The empire promised had yielded only dust. The enemy, not their leaders, had built the world of plenty, a truth impossible to ignore or explain away. Each hot shower, each bar of chocolate, each unbroken street gnawed at the fortress of belief they had carried from home. As crickets sang beyond the wire, Anna lay awake thinking of Munich, of her mother boiling weeds for supper, of everything lost. She thought of the guard's quiet nod, the chocolate melting on her tongue, and the water cleansing her skin. Between those images stretched a gulf she could not cross, though she sensed something within her shifting beyond repair. With dawn gilding the barbed wire in gold, The women realized survival was no longer their only struggle, but understanding what it meant. Autumn leaves drifted across the campyard, the season turning while time inside remained fluid, measured only by meals and letters. Beneath that rhythm, something deeper took hold, a reckoning of identity formed not by orders, but by reflection. Anna sat one evening on the barrack steps, her diary open upon her knees, the fading light trembling across the page. Each word she wrote carried a weight that frightened her, a recognition that she could no longer escape what captivity had revealed. I have eaten more in captivity than through all the starving winters endured beneath the collapsing Reich. Yet my heart remains restless. I have slept without fear of sirens or falling bombs, yet peace still eludes me in these quiet nights. What world is this, where enemies behave with more decency than our own commanders once demanded of us? Her pen shook as she wrote, the ink bleeding where her hand trembled under the weight of confusion. Nearby, laughter broke through the stillness, women giggling as they exchanged candy and compared lipstick shades. Their voices carried a fragile brightness, a sound that mocked despair with a hint of forgotten youth. Anna longed to share that lightness, but her loyalty to a homeland in ruins clung to her like dust. The Americans meanwhile learned to see their captives not as symbols, but as people worn by hunger and defeat. Some guards shared cigarettes through the fence, gestures stripped of politics and filled instead with weary humanity. Still, distance lingered, for these were prisoners, reminders of graves across oceans. The camp softened through repetition, yet the air held unspoken tension. Beyond the wire, however, revelations began to unfold. Groups of women were escorted into nearby towns to labor, to harvest, to clean, to repair what peace demanded. They picked cotton under a broad sun, worked canneries heavy with scent, or swept parks surrounded by curious eyes. Townspeople watched them, some cold, some kind, some merely puzzled by the sight of former enemies. Children pointed, whispering in wonder, while shopkeepers studied them from shadowed doorways. What stunned the women most was not hatred, but normality, a life untouched by devastation. Movie theaters glowed with laughter, grocery shelves overflowed with produce, radios crackled with baseball scores and jazz. For those from cities buried beneath ash, such ordinary abundance felt unbearable. One afternoon, after hours of harvesting, Anna's group was invited into a church hall for lunch prepared by local women. The tables overflowed with sandwiches and pies, fruit gleaming like jewels under soft light. They hesitated, uncertain if the feast was real, until an old woman urged gently, "Eat, eat, my dears." Anna bit into an apple, crisp and alive, tears threatening her composure as memory whispered, "Save the peel for soup." That night, the barracks were thick with reflection, voices low with guilt and grief. Some admitted aloud that perhaps they had been deceived, not chosen for glory but sacrificed for delusion. "Who were the beasts now?" murmured one, "those who destroyed or those who endured?" No answer came, only silence vast and heavy. Yet alongside shame stirred gratitude, confusing and undeserved, for even captivity had given them back a fragment of their humanity. Anna's diary became a quiet confession of turmoil, a record of contradictions that gnawed at her resolve, defying the simplicity of hate. Hatred, she once believed, was a fortress, a wall built to keep the enemy distant, the heart protected from confusion. Yet what the Americans offered, bread, soap, music, slipped past those walls with disarming gentleness, eroding every conviction she had once held. If they were capable of kindness, she wrote, then what became of the ruins, the blood, the lies she had swallowed for years? That evening she closed the book, her chest tightening with something that felt like betrayal, heavier than any hunger she had known. The guards too sensed the change, watching their prisoners laugh at American films projected onto makeshift camp walls, hearing them sing along to radio songs in awkward but genuine voices. It unsettled everyone, for the laughter of former enemies sounded almost human, almost familiar. One sergeant murmured to another that you might forget they were prisoners if not for the uniforms, a warning disguised as wonder. War demanded lines, but life blurred them, reshaping everything with unbearable tenderness. The true shock, however, was not in the food or the work, but in the mirror's reflection that now looked back. The women's bodies changed, faces softening, skin regaining color, eyes clearing as though washed of war. Some even looked younger, as if captivity had undone years of deprivation, restoring what loyalty to the Reich had stolen. To see themselves healthy again felt almost like treason, for the enemy had fed them while their homeland had starved them without mercy. It was revelation and indictment intertwined, a truth that could not be denied, however softly it spoke. Yet beneath their laughter lingered unease, for captivity would end, and home meant ruins, waiting in silence. The thought of trading soap for soot, abundance for hunger, filled the nights with whispered dread. "I am afraid to go back," some admitted in darkness, voices trembling with forbidden truth. Rumors spread like wind of transfers, repatriation, journeys eastward toward what was left of Germany. Would their families recognize them? Faces full, cheeks bright with the health of captivity, hearts altered by decency. Some feared the judgment in their mother's eyes more than hunger itself, the accusation of having lived while others died. Anna wrote what she had never dared, that she feared leaving more than arriving, her words freezing on the page with honesty's chill, for the enemy's greatest weapon was not guns or bombs, but dignity, the quiet mercy that had undone hatred. When frost laced the fences, the announcement came. A transport was leaving soon, and silence gripped the barracks like winter itself. Names were called one by one, voices steady, faces trembling, and Anna stepped forward into the pale light of morning. As her name echoed through the air, she understood that the war was no longer between nations, but within her own reborn heart.